The key thing to remember about the period before 1000 is that migration is not a new phenomenon. It's not something that belongs to the modern age only. Migration has been a key factor in the peopling of the British Isles since at least the end of the last ice age, so 8,000 years ago, ever since Britain became an island. So migration, the movement of people into Britain and the movement of people within Britain, is a constant phenomenon. It's just that at some times we can see it better than in other periods. In the 500 or so years before the year 1000, the main sort of groups that we hear about in the historical sources are people like Angles and Saxons, the Anglo-Saxons, and indeed Vikings a little bit later. But it's important to know that it's in this period, which is commonly called the Dark Ages, which is a terrible label, is also the time when the kingdoms of what became England and the kingdoms of Scotland were formed. And the creation of those kingdoms has at its core the movement of people, both of the Scoti, who were the Irish, into what is now called modern-day Scotland, but also the Angles and the Saxons and all sorts of other Germanic groups, people from the near continent moving into the British Isles to create a kingdom that later became known as the Kingdom of England. We do actually have a lot of sources for studying migration in Britain before 1000. We've got lots of textual evidence, lots of people writing at the time whose records have been preserved for us in really old and interesting manuscripts. Manuscripts like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, manuscripts like Bede's ecclesiastical history of the English people. Now, Bede was a monk writing in northern England at a place called Jarrow, not far from modern-day Newcastle, and he wrote the first history of the English people. So our historical sources are very good at telling us about events, about episodes, about things that happen, about the appearance of strangers in a community, about violent raiders off the coast. What they tend not to talk about so explicitly is the integration of groups, the acculturation of one cultural or one ethnic group into another. And we have to look a bit harder at our evidence to see that happening. A good example of that is looking at the way in which non-written sources reflect evidence of more than one culture. And a great example is the extraordinary cross, stone monument, a huge tall stone cross that was put up in a churchyard at a place called Gosforth in Cumbria. And this huge stone cross is obviously a Christian symbol, and it contains an image of the crucifixion of Christ, the quintessential defining feature of Christianity, and it's got a large cross on the top of it. But all the way around that monument are stories not of Christianity, but of the Viking legends of Ragnarok and the Day of Judgment. And these stories are told as sort of motifs, as episodes all the way around this cross. And it's thought that this combination of the Christian story of the crucifixion of Christ, that sort of crisis moment, and the story of Ragnarok might be a sort of a teaching tool, a way of explaining to peoples whose traditions come from different areas about Christianity and about how their own traditions, their own stories might be understood in the light of a Christian narrative as well. And it's a great example of how traditions, about how cultures can integrate through narrative storytelling.